Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. So today's guest is Shavaun Scott, a psychotherapist and author who brings a deeply personal and courageous story to our conversation on the How to Deal with Grief and Trauma podcast. In her memoir, Nightbird, Shavaun explores the devastating experience of her husband's death. Actually, it was a revenge suicide, an act he carried out on the very day that she told him she wanted a divorce. After 17 years in an abusive relationship, Shavaun was left not only with the trauma of a gruesome scene staged in her own home, but also with complex emotional aftermath. Grief not just for the loss of a life, but for the relationship that never truly was. As a therapist herself, Shavaun offers a profound and nuanced perspective on the psychological toll of intimate partner abuse, the moral injuries of suicide, and the long road of healing. This is a powerful and honest conversation about trauma, survival, and the complicated nature of grief. About this week's guest. Shavaun has been a psychotherapist for nearly 35 years in Oregon and California in the US. Shavaun shares her passion about mental health and wellness through writing, speaking, and podcasting. She is the author of 4 books. While she has worked extensively with grief and trauma, she has also experienced it in multiple ways throughout her life. She lost her mother when she was 16, her father when she was 35, and her previous husband of 17 years by suicide in 2004. Shavaun now lives and works from home in the forest in Portland, Oregon, which she shares with her husband and a house full of beloved animals. So welcome, Shavaun. How are you today?
I am wonderful. It's so nice to be here speaking with you. Thank you.
So just already from the introduction and the biography, and we met before recording this, there's a lot that you carried in your life. And, I want to start with you giving a little bit of context for people listening to what would they need to know from you? What have you experienced in your life that made you know or practice dealing with grief and trauma?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, grief has really shaped my form developmentally over the years. When my mother died when I was 16, she had brain cancer. And so she was in a coma for 6 months. And I was her primary caregiver.
Wow.
And it was a very, well, you can imagine, very intense, long process. And I integrated that reality. I think I developed an awareness of the value of life, value every day, because my mother was only 50 at the time of her death. And then losing my father at 35, my father was very important to me. So I thought that I had gotten, I'll just say, pretty acclimated to grief. But then with the suicide after the 17 years of marriage, that one really knocked my feet out from under me. That was the big one. And in the 20 years since then, I've done a lot of reflecting and a lot of personal growth and healing and recovery. And I feel like it's really sort of deepened my worldview about the unique paths we all experience.
I mean, this summary already makes one gasp for air in the sense of when I think about you losing your mom when you were 16 and then your father 20 years later after obviously having been a semi-orphaned daughter. And I would expect back then you said that your father was an important figure in your life. And then, which is interesting 2004, which is more than 20 years ago, your husband. So if you're looking back over those experiences in your life, how would you say this has shaped your form? Give us a little bit more context for us to understand, because you have the luxury or the way of perspective, which I like, in terms of it gives people who are in the thick of grief a way to look forward. This is you having dealt with all of that. How does that work?
I have used the term, I always carry a shard of sorrow in my heart. That's the best way I can put it. I think it's given me an incredible sensitivity to other people's pain and grief. And that has probably helped me in my work as a clinician, with that ability to tune in to what other people are going through, but also that dual reality of life can be good again, even when you're in the darkest phase and you don't know how to go on, or you don't know if you can go on. I've been able to go on, and there have been a lot of people who supported me in that process. And I talk a lot about my older, wiser self that I think has developed. And some people will put that in a spiritual sense. Other people will just say it's just a part of your personality that's grown. But it definitely, I talk with people every now and then who've never lost a loved one, and they're in middle age and they've never gone through the experience, and they have a hard time realizing that life is going to come to an end, where I have always had a very strong awareness of that and see every day as a gift. Because I know since my mother's death, I became aware of she lived her life that someday she would retire from her very hard job and someday she would enjoy life. She never got to that age. And so I understood at 16, I was not going to live my life that way, that I was going to at least be aware that every day could be my last. And so I think those are some of the ways it shaped my outlook.
Yeah. So maybe let's go back maybe 25 or even 30 years to the younger Shavaun who was in an abusive relationship already. I mean, that already is part of the story of the trauma that has shaped you. So if we were to revisit her, how did she deal with that on the previous death in her life that meant that you were a parentless young woman in a marriage?
Yeah. I think during that marriage, a lot of the times I was suffering from PTSD and didn't realize it. I had framed myself as I'm very strong, I can handle the hardest things, and was fairly resilient in still being able to work and function. And I went to college and graduate school, and I was driven. I'm a little bit obsessive. And during the years of that marriage, I had the fantasy of who I thought he would become. And so I was really looking for ways to fix him, which we can frame now as a big mistake a lot of women make. But there were times when he was very wonderful. And of course, that's why we stay in relationships like that. And I think there was a lot of self-delusion that the wonderful part of him was who he really was. And this angry, abusive part of him, well, that was just a symptom of something that was eventually going to get corrected. And after 17 years, I evolved over time to see that, no, this was personality, probably personality disorders, and this was not going to change. And I didn't want any punishment for him. I wanted him to go on and have a good life, but I did not want to be yoked to this person any longer. And I became very clear on that. And that, of course, when I communicated that to him, that was the way he ended his life. I think he was always a very rageful man, and I think this was just sort of the ultimate expression of anger.
Wow. What do you think our culture, or maybe women and men, misunderstand about abusive relationships and why people stay for longer than the outside would think necessary?
Yeah, people often rather than saying because it's usually the man who's inflicting violence. Women can be abusive verbally in other ways, but I'll go with the gender type of, the man is abusive and the woman is the victim or the survivor, however we frame it. She's the one who stays. Why does she stay? Why does she stay? And that can, rather than saying, why is he abusive? It's why does she stay?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be very shaming. And often the response to that is she doesn't consciously realize or admit that this is abuse because of a very heightened level of empathy in her. And the way that often after an abusive episode, the abuser will be very remorseful. Mm-hmm. And very apologetic and promise that this will never happen again. And there's this seduction of this honeymoon phase that happens after. And I think a lot of us are very seduced by that. And we're very much bonded in a very deep bond that we're calling love. But I think we can frame it now as it's a trauma bond.
Yeah,
but that
absolutely.
can feel very much like an addiction. Yeah. And then there's the very practical reasons of a lot of times women don't have a career where they can support themselves if they're raising young children. There's the worry of homelessness. The United States does not have a very good social safety net for people. Unfortunately, we're backwards in many ways in this country. And there's often just a very practical fear of, I don't know how I'm going to make it apart from him. So some women stay for a long period of time, even when they're planning to leave. It's sort of, they have to work themselves into a plan, start saving money, and figure out how they're going to do it. I think there's also often an intuitive sense that if I finally make the break, something very bad may happen. And of course, that could be a suicide. It could be, we see cases every month here about a woman who's murdered and then he murders himself. Sometimes they even annihilate the whole family. They kill children. They kill the wife and they kill themselves. And I think on a very deep level, many women have told me, I'm afraid to leave because of what he'll do if I try.
Yeah. And I mean, your story is one of those where
exactly,
those themes, in your clients as well, probably you see, and your story sort of tells the story of abusive relationship and that aftermath of suicide, how this is tragically linked.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in your case, having been a psychologist while that was occurring, how was that for you? I mean, now you have perspective on it, but being in it and also knowing a little bit more than we would say the general public does.
Mm-hmm. I think in my work, which ironically, I was working in a domestic violence counseling program for part of that marriage. And I saw myself sometimes reflected in the women's stories, but their stories were often worse than my story. And that's how I framed it at the time. I didn't get hit with a closed fist. I got pushed, I got shoved, I got restrained. He put holes in the walls and things like that. So it was definitely abusive, but I wasn't punched in the face. I didn't have fingers broken. I didn't have these extreme things that happened to me. And I think I had my own blind spots because therapists are people too. And we struggle with our own histories, our own upbringings, our own lack of ability to have insight about ourselves sometimes. And I also think I had a sense, this was not really conscious, that if I told people, I would have to take action. I would have to do something. So I think in that way, I colluded with keeping the secret and keeping it very private. And so people who looked at our marriage from the outside often thought things were fine. They didn't have a clue. And I think over time, that was also something I started doing, was confiding in trusted people and confiding in a therapist. And once I opened that door, the clarity came and I was able to see the parallels with my own situation and some of the people that I had worked with as a counselor.
Were your children aware of it when you said that it was very personal and you kept it under wrap?
The children were not aware of a lot of his mistreatment of me. Because that would happen when, these were children from my very early teenage marriage. I got married at 16 and had 3 kids, boom, boom, boom. And so these were not his children. And they spent weekends with their biological father.
Hmm.
And so most of his extreme outbursts and rage episodes were when the children were not there.
Okay.
Although they did see him occasionally, what they came up with the term, he has tantrums.
Okay.
And so they were aware, but they would sort of roll their eyes at him, and he never directed it at them. I think he knew intuitively that abusing my children would never, ever be tolerated, and that would be an immediate end to things. And he had a very strong dependency on me in a lot of ways. He relied on me to regulate his moods and help him make decisions in life. And of course, I was the breadwinner.
Okay.
And he, because of his anger, had lost most jobs he would ever obtain. And I was always trying to think of a way to help him with that. And that became clear to me over time as well. There was no helping him with that.
Hmm.
He was not a person who was ever going to sustain gainful employment. So there was a lot of interlocking, you could say pathologies on both our parts that kept us together for so long. But as I became increasingly aware that, there are destructive patterns here that aren't going to change, that's when I think I was psychologically becoming ready to move on. And by the time I told him I am really done, and I was longing for, at that point, my kids were off in college. I was alone. I was doing fine economically, could support myself. And I just had envisioned my beautiful little cottage near the ocean, living with my 4 cats. And that was the life I had primed myself and had envisioned and was ready for.
Hmm. So then you told him that you wanted to leave or that you wanted to divorce. And the next thing, you are met with this gruesome scene at your home.
Mm.
Take us to the Shavaun who had to deal with this shock after having come to the decision after 17 years of abusive relationship, which obviously leaves deep psychological scars.
Mm-hmm.
What did that do to you in your person, in your psyche?
I was broken when I walked in and saw that scene. I've told this story a lot recently, and one of the fascinating aspects of the shock that I went into, I think it was just this adrenaline, cortisol response throughout my body and my mind. And I say my brain broke. And I picked up the phone and tried to dial 911, our emergency number, and I couldn't do it. I dialed 711, I dialed 411 for directory assistance, and here I was, sobbing on the phone and trying to explain what was wrong. And the people were saying, "You need 911." Well, I'm trying to call 911 and I can't do it. So I was really broken. I wasn't thinking clearly. I think I had a lot of dissociation going on. It was if there was a part of me watching from above,
Mm-hmm.
but my brain just didn't work. And I was shaking. I had, these strong physical reactions that went on for weeks. I was cold, even though the temperature was very warm. I was dressing in layers of thermal underwear with flannel over that, a big coat, and Ugg boots on my feet, and I still shivered. So this was certainly the strongest, if you want to call it a very complicated traumatic grief reaction,
Yeah.
the strongest thing I had ever experienced. I lost 15 pounds in the first month because I just couldn't eat anything. And I really needed friends to stay with me. People didn't want to leave me alone because the fear was I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't drive. I couldn't go out to the grocery store. I couldn't even go out and get the mail. And so my kids at different points came and they had their own lives and other things they had to do, but they spent time with me. And I had wonderful friends, some who came from faraway places throughout the state, but they came and stayed with me. And that was, I think, the thing that really saved my life. As I told them then, it's not that I want to die, but I don't know how to live through
Exactly.
this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that shock that puts the body into a complete sympathetic overload. And from the
Yes.
way you tell the story, it's like the nervous system was stuck in sympathetic for quite some time through the shock.
Very much.
Yeah.
Very much.
Whew. So from that time, from the earliest shock and trauma, what made you survive beyond the help of your friends? You know, how did you continue deal with what had happened?
Mm-hmm. I think there was always a part of me that, again, my wiser self, that held hope that things were going to get better. I remember going to a suicide survivors support group, and in some ways I got benefit from it. And then in other ways, I thought this isn't quite the right thing for me. The thing that benefited me was hearing every person in the room, and there were about 20 people in the room, who said, I feel responsible. And if only I had done this, or if only I hadn't said that, this wouldn't have happened. And of course, that's where my brain was stuck. If I had stayed with him, he'd still be alive. So by me ending the marriage, I killed him. And I realized, listening to everyone in that room, that this was a myth. This is how we get stuck. And I could listen to other people's stories and clearly see, you didn't cause this.
Yeah.
And other people then gave me the feedback, well, you didn't cause it either. You're not that powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, if I had been all that powerful, I would have fixed him over 17 years, right? I couldn't fix him, and I couldn't save him. And I did have the right to not be yoked to him for the rest of my life and give up 17 more years or 30 more years. You know, I didn't have to do that. So that was really beneficial. The one thing that didn't fit for me in the group, there was one woman in particular whose son had died several years before. And she said, I have never laughed a moment since his death. And that really hit me in the gut, because laughter has always been such an important part of my life and my personality. And I love humor. And when I heard that, I thought, I can't. I can't go a year thinking I'm not going to laugh again. And that piece of it just didn't fit for me. So I was fortunate enough to find a really good therapist. I had to go to a couple first that didn't quite understand it, and they were horrified by the story and they didn't know how to help. But then I found one that really specialized in suicide, and he had in his own background a number of people who suicided, and he was wonderful. He was so helpful. And so that really made a big difference for me.
Yeah, I think you mentioned there a really important part about how your personal story can even shock another person by telling it. So that's like trauma in the third degree. When you tell the story, people might like, oh my God, how did you survive this? And that's not really that's not really the part that you want to find in a counselor's trying to help you.
Exactly.
But I mean, what you're saying, it's very common that suicide survivors haunt themselves with the question, if only I had.
If only.
Yeah. So as you probably know, my mother died from suicide, and there are thoughts in our family, if only I had done something different, or stayed longer, left earlier, or whatever. So from your understanding now, looking back in those more than 20 years, can you help us understand how you found back to your laughter with the sentence you mentioned about that grief group that this woman said, I don't want to laugh again. How did you find back to your laughter or your joy in life?
Yeah. There was a funny event when I was staying with one of my dear friends, and she and her husband were both psychologists, and they were basically creating their little inpatient psychiatric program in their home just for me. And so anytime I needed to talk or vent 24 hours a day, they were there. And they helped me feel anger at this because they framed it as this was an act of aggression against you, and you should be angry about it because this was not fair. This was not the way that this should have gone. And then they helped me laugh too. They were very jovial people and they were laughing. And in the beginning, I couldn't really laugh with them. But she said, you have occupational therapy living here with me. And every day you have to get up and take a walk around the backyard because I was huddled in bed under covers. And she said, you have to get up and do that or walk down the end of the street with me and get the mail. We want you to come out and at least sit at the dinner table with us. If you don't eat, that's fine, but at least be there with us. And they used a lot of humor. And there was one day I was on psychiatric medication at the time because I was not sleeping and all those things were going on. And I was a little dizzy and I was walking around her backyard and she had a swimming pool. And she was telling me, oh, look up in the trees. There's a beautiful bird up there. And I was gazing up in the trees and I stepped back for a better view and I fell in the swimming pool. And of course, I was wearing my suede coat, my flannel, my Ugg boots, and I sank right to the bottom of the pool. And I realized at that point, I could just drown here. This would be very easy to drown. And then I heard her screaming, help, help, she's fallen in the pool. She's drowning. I don't know what to do. And so I remember finding it kind of funny. I mean, I don't know why I thought it was funny, but I pushed up from the bottom of the pool with all my strength. And as I burst out of the water, I was laughing and I was laughing hysterically. And that seemed to be a shift for me, that here she thought she was saving my life and helping me. And then she thought she almost drowned me in her swimming pool. And the whole thing just seemed so silly and ironic. And I kept laughing. I laughed for about a half hour as her husband ran out of the house with towels and blankets and they tried to, warm me up. And there was a shift after that one event. I call it shock therapy in my book. It was the shock of the cold water. And shortly after that, I think I was able to see, sometimes it was ironic humor, dark humor, but I was able to come back to my sense of self and laugh again.
Sounds like a cold plunge, restarting the joy in your life.
Restarting, exactly.
Yeah. So these were beautiful support of friends who really know a little bit of what I would say nervous system regulation. They ask you to show up, co-regulation. They ask you to walk, which also helps regulate the nervous system. So a lot of things, as you were saying, occupational therapist, but really beautiful. And what were those things that, looking back, that you've experienced with your circle of, let's say, friends or people around you that wasn't helpful? And not in a sense of blaming those people, but in a sense of giving also advice or suggestions to those people listening who might have someone in their circle who's dealing with trauma from a suicide or the loss of a suicide, for them to understand, well, what would be helpful and what might not be necessary in that sense.
I think the most unhelpful things were people who, and this was like 3 days after this event had happened, the suicide. And some people said, well, let's go out to a movie. Let's go out to lunch. And I couldn't talk right. I couldn't walk straight. I was a mess. And I loved them because they were trying to come up with things that they thought would be helpful. But the idea of sitting through a movie in a theater and not being, a mess and sobbing, it's like they didn't quite get how severe this reaction was. And so I think the more helpful friends were the people who would just come and sit with me. Or there were a couple that throughout the day, I was very perseverative and just thinking about this over and over. And how could he do this? And why did he do this? And I would email certain people back and forth and they would email me back. Now we would be texting, but we weren't texting on smartphones then. And so it was just the people who listened. And, they would say, I don't know. I wish I could explain it. I wish I had an answer for you. And then I'd say the same thing in 10 minutes again. And they just sat with me and were kind and compassionate, and I knew they loved me, but they didn't try too hard to say, well, let's go out to lunch and let's go to a movie. So I think it was the people who could understand that it was going to take more time. I did go on some hikes. And I think nature was very good for me, getting outdoors. But some people really wanted to get up to the top of that steep mountain on the hike, and I just physically wasn't able to. So I said, I will go back and wait for you in the car, and that was fine. But I think people who could get me outside, and even if that was just a short walk, or sitting in their backyard and smelling the roses, I think those things were helpful.
Yeah. To put a bit of context on that, I think, it's a question of time and space, in the sense as going out to a movie at a later stage, whatever later is, might be helpful. Yes. But at the time when you have ruminating thoughts and again the same thing, presence, and being there, being able to witness what's going on without trying to fix or fade what is going on for you, without trying to distract you from what's going on.
Right.
Is what is needed in the moment, because those ruminating thoughts are quite normal given the stress of your brain trying to figure out what has happened.
Exactly. Very, very true. You nailed it. And one of the kindest things a friend did, it did not occur to me. She said, may I come over and clear out his stuff out of your bathroom? His shaving supplies, his toiletries, his deodorant. He had his own toiletry area. I had my own toiletry area. And she said, I think you'll feel better if I clear that all out, so you're not looking at reminders of him all the time. And that was so kind of her to come over and do that, just clean my bathroom for me. And it did feel better having all that. It wasn't like this constant reminder of, oh, here's his shaving kit that he's not ever going to be using again. And I certainly didn't feel like I had the capacity to clean that up. And so that I'm forever grateful to her for that. What an interesting thing that she thought of that for me, but that really helped.
And also the way you phrased it, as a question. I don't know if she was exactly saying it like that, but it gives you an option to, maybe you don't know the answer, but at least you are given a choice in terms of, would that be helpful? Can I do that? Yeah.
It was very helpful, and she was very sensitive about it, and I appreciated that. There were people who came in at different points. He had taken up a big share of the house with a record collection, LPs, and I think he had like 1,700 LPs, and they were worth a bit of money, and I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't want them, and again, it was just more of a reminder of his energy in the house, and so a man that he knew from the local record store where they sold used records, he said, I will come and take them all. And so he came and boxed them all up and took them. And that was a couple months down the road, but it felt like it was the right time. And then I didn't have to be the one to sort through them all and do it. So I was so grateful to that man too. So some people came up with these kind of unconventional, very practical ways to help that I appreciated.
Yeah, it seems like you had a variety of different people in your support network that had quite out of the ordinary ideas and
very out of the ordinary ideas.
Deal with your life situation.
Yeah, I was very, very lucky in that way for the people. I'm forever grateful to them.
So 17 years in an abusive relationship, it leaves some scars. And now you're married again. So, but what patterns or beliefs were the hardest to unlearn from the abusive relationship in terms of where you are now?
The big lesson that I had begun to integrate, which was why I was ready to leave the relationship, is that a relationship should not be about forcing your nervous system to handle mistreatment, that's not love, and that would never be love, and I would never have a relationship like that again. And there were a lot of patterns of lying during those 17 years. He was simply not honest, and I would always be finding out about secrets. And so moving forward into dating, I was just really careful and wanted a person who did not do big anger, didn't have blow-ups. I'm very hypersensitive to that still.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very hypersensitive to disrespect, to being treated in a disrespectful manner at all, disrespectful tones of voice. Someone glaring at me, it's like that's a real trigger for me.
Yeah,
And
understandable.
so I knew I needed to be with a very gentle person who, if they were angry, they could talk about it without going into venting and rage and those kind of things. And so and honesty, that there had to be a no secrets policy, that I will never keep secrets, and anybody that I partner with, there just won't be secrets. And so those were the qualifications. And I did, the following year, meet a wonderful person, and we were just friends first. But as we started to really feel a bond and feel attracted to each other, we had those conversations about, he had been through some things in his life, and he was looking for the same kind of thing I was looking for. And so now it's been nearly 20 years of a very different kind of marriage. And I'm sad that we didn't meet when we were, much younger, and that, we had to learn a lot of very hard life lessons to be where we are now in other relationships. But I'm so glad I survived and held hope and was able to continue on and build a very different kind of life. I say now, I knew I needed a gentle life. My nervous system has been through so much, and that's why I love working from home. I love working with people who are very motivated for personal growth and healing. I had worked in the past in very trauma-focused places and done a lot of crisis work, and worked with the police department at one point, going out into very dangerous scenarios. And I'm too old for that at this point, and I just need my soul needs more gentleness now. So that's been my focus.
Yeah, you really beautifully describe the knowing and caring for your nervous system as to what it needs after all that has happened, to not be triggered too much, too often with whatever surroundings or people that you surround yourself with.
Yes.
So one last question that I'm interested, because I have this sense of, if women are listening who are in abusive relationship, I mean, you spoke about the denial and everything. And what would you want them to know if they are in a relationship that they may be wondering whether it is healthy or not? How to understand what is okay and what not, and how to go on the journey to find that out, to whether it is staying or whether it is leaving. Can you give us a little bit of, because that I think is really the question that is in people's mind. Well, how do I know? Because mine doesn't seem as bad as what other people are saying.
So many people don't call it abuse if they're not hit with a fist. And words can be crueler. The kinds of things, the name calling, the criticism, incessant criticism when you can't do anything right. Somebody who throws things, who yells in your face. These are all forms of abuse, coercive control. And I think being honest with ourselves about our own feelings, because I think some of us go numb, and we're very good at going numb and saying, well, this is just how he is. I don't let it get to me. It doesn't hurt me. And I think there's denial in that. And if it's a healthy attachment, a healthy bond, we need to feel loved. We need to feel safe. I mean, he should be our safe person. Home should be our refuge, not a place that we walk on eggshells to always try to be careful so we don't set this person off and get his dark side. So I think being honest about how we're feeling, and to put it most simply, love should not hurt. And if we're having to live with pain, a lot of times it manifests in migraine headaches or stomach problems, tension in the body. And I think a lot of times people are having health problems that really the core of this is you're living with somebody who's hurting you.
Absolutely.
And don't keep it secret. Sometimes we don't want people to know because we have shame about it. And we don't want people to think badly of him. But we need to have trusted friends or a therapist, some kind of counselor, religious leader, somebody that we can talk to and be honest about what really we experience in this relationship.
Mm. And you might have seen the film This Should End With Us with Blake Lively. I think that was a beautiful way to explore the topic of abusive relationship, and also in a really sensitive way as to showing the love of this couple at the same time as the challenges, the intergenerational patterns that this can create.
Very much.
Mm. So thank you so much for sharing your personal story, and I hope that Nightbird, for those who are interested, you'll find the links in the show note, will be an interesting way to connect more with you and your story. And I hope that this will touch people and help people understand where they're at and what they want in their life in general.
That's my goal. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shavaun.
Thank you. So nice to talk.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.